As much as I love to answer a good religious question, and I think you all know that I do, I also think we all know that there's nothing at all new under the religious sun. So we get things like this. But the religious are incapable of seeing just how dumb it all is, mostly because they just don't care. They never care. They're incapable of caring. And maybe this would be a good time to start. Today's article comes out of Psychology Today, which you might think would make it a little more coherent, but I think we know by now that's just not how this works. It's an article called Profoundly Challenging Questions to Ask an Atheist. And by the time we're done with this, I think you're probably going to agree that there is nothing profound or challenging in here at all. It's just ignorance and ego, and those two things in close proximity, they only lead to immaturity. So let's dive right in. Are any of these questions going to be worthwhile? Don't hold your breath. Profoundly challenging questions to ask an atheist. Now, I figure you can already guess what I'm going to say because there have been a lot of videos and articles, things like that we've looked at that have suggested that they have something intelligent to say, but they never ever do. And I really wish that the religious can come up with something worthwhile, but I figure it's pretty obvious that's not likely to happen. Instead, we get the same old tired arguments that have been debunked time and time and time again, and even after we correct the religious, it doesn't seem to matter. They'll just repeat it again verbatim by the time you're done showing them where they've gone wrong. Because they don't care. So, while I don't hold any great hope here, or for any religious argument, let's take a look and see. It starts off with a quote from Stephen Hawking, but I don't really think that's particularly useful. It's only there to lend some kind of legitimacy to the article, so we're just going to skip over that. I once heard a theologian in a science-religion debate astutely declare that whereas religious believers must explain the problem of evil, non-believers must explain everything else. And what do you expect? That's just self-serving, a way for the theologians to try to shift the burden of proof to the other side. But that is not how it works. See, where I think the religious are going wrong, and there's a lot of places that they go wrong, but in this case, it's where they're treating the debate like a high-end fight between religion and atheism. But that is not what's going on. It's not religion at the top and everything else falls underneath it, versus atheism at the top of its own pile, and absolutely everything in the world falls under that. They are expecting us to be just like they are, and they're wrong. Atheism is the answer to one and only one question. It's looking at the claims of the religious and saying, I don't believe you. That's it. There is nothing under atheism. So what I figure he's going to do, what a lot of them do, is talk about science, which is not atheism, and then try to project science onto atheism, which doesn't work. If you want to talk about science, that's fantastic. Go talk to scientists. Just because most scientists are atheists, that doesn't make atheists responsible for science. Because that is not how reality is. The religiously unsolvable problem of evil, why do terrible things happen in a world governed by an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God, certainly does challenge the notion of a personal God who cares about each of us individually. And the idea of such a God authoring books has also lost ground, with many liberal branches of Judeo-Christian religions having moved beyond literal belief in divine revelation of the Bible, since it is now well established that the books of the Hebrew Bible were written in stages by very human writers many centuries later than the Bible's own claimed authorship. The problem here is that when talking to people who don't accept your religious claims, you don't get to just rely on your own religious claims if you hope to have a coherent conversation. And the religious run into that kind of problem all over the place. In fact, I was just having a discussion on free will today with a Catholic who kept insisting that all of these facts about God were true, and that's why people could have free will and an all-knowing God at the same time. Well, I pointed out that I didn't accept any of those so-called facts, and he'd actually have to be able to prove it in order to have a chance at a rational discussion with me. Instead, he chose to run away, because I think he knew that he couldn't do anything coherent. Faith doesn't get you anywhere. It just makes you look dumb. If the situation were reversed, I wouldn't assume that the theist automatically accepts the things that I do. I would expect that I had to justify it to them. But they don't want to do that because they can't. But they don't know what to do with themselves without it. They have to have faith. And it's a good thing I don't rely on faith, right? But this still leaves much room for belief in some sort of supernatural higher power or God, some kind of intentional, conscious force of nature that created, designed, and continues to guide the universe and its contents. But there's no good reason at all to do any of that. This is a problem with the religious mindset. They want the supernatural to be real, but they can offer no independent evidence that it actually is. They can't even describe what the supernatural is supposed to be. I can't tell you how many times I've pointed that out to the religious and they just get mad. It's an emotional desire, not an evidential ability to produce verifiable proof. There is no good reason to think that anything supernatural exists at all. Period. This is another problem on their side, of course, where they assume that materialism is faith because supernaturalism on their side absolutely is. But it's not. It's the simple fact that we only have evidence for the natural. We didn't say, well, we're only going to believe in the natural and that's the end of it. No, we looked for evidence. That's what we found the evidence for. Now, if you want us to accept the supernatural, you need to produce evidence for the supernatural, and then we'll accept that too. We don't believe in the natural. We accept it because it is demonstrably so. Prove your claims. Go ahead. Because until you can, you've got nothing but wishful thinking. Compelling arguments for belief in a higher power. Yeah, I hear that kind of thing a lot, but the people that I hear it from, they're not talking about compelling to the opposition. They're talking compelling to themselves, and then they expect their opposition to be just like they are, which, of course, we never are. Until quite recent times, some of the fundamental mysteries about the universe stumped many thoughtful, educated people, even many top scientists, and seemed to support supernatural beliefs, defying rational explanations. And now they don't. And they didn't really before. It was just that people wanted to insert their own made-up explanations because they were very uncomfortable saying, I don't know, but they didn't know. I don't think there was ever a good reason to believe in gods if you're being a rational human being. But I guess it was understandable, given the seeming desire for human beings to know things that they don't know. When you don't have a good explanation, just make something up because it'll make you happy. Then it just gets ingrained into the human psyche, and you get what we have today. People believing things for no good reason, just because it feels good, and it gets reinforced by the society in which you live. Except now, that's not really the case anymore, is it? We know that the things to which gods were traditionally assigned, they don't need gods, do they? We're running out of things that the label of God is useful for. Now, for people who aren't that smart or who react entirely emotionally, that's going to be a hard sell, but that doesn't really matter, does it? The only thing that matters to the rational is the demonstrable truth, and that's one place that the religious are having an increasingly difficult time. It won't be too much longer until the majority of people just give up the religious ghost. And won't that be great? Next, he gives a quote from Darwin, which, again, it's totally irrelevant, so I'm just going to skip it. I really think he's just looking for some unearned legitimacy, so skip. Anyhow, theism even made a comeback in recent decades as science revealed the incredible intricacies and complexity of life and the universe. It all seemed too complex, too clever to be unguided. Several enigmas remained seemingly impenetrable. Now, this article was written in 2019, and even then, religion was in freefall. It's been dying since about 2007, so I have no idea how religion is making a comeback when, for instance, Southern Baptists have been losing 100,000 members a year since 2012. Now, I could have gone in here and produced all the graphs and statistics on religious decline to prove to the religious that they weren't doing any better in 2019 than they were today, but really, what's the point? The religious believe what they want to believe. They are not at all concerned with the actual truth. They want to think that Christianity will convert the world, even though worldwide it's in a tailspin and Islam is rapidly moving to take over. And even in the first world, Islam isn't doing that hot. So mostly I think it's a waste of time to try to tell the religious that they're wrong because, sadly, they just don't care, do they? A sophisticated intellectual defense of belief in God usually starts with some version of the argument that the universe must have had a beginning and could not have brought itself into existence. Why is there something rather than nothing? How could something come from nothing? The argument then proceeds to the assertion that the immediate complexity of our world could not have arisen spontaneously and unguided. But here's the problem. Even if the universe did have a beginning, and we can't even really justify that, only our own local instantiation of space-time, but even if it did, that doesn't mean a God done it. And it certainly doesn't mean that your God done it. Now, the author, he's a doctor, which just goes to prove that having a degree doesn't mean you have a brain, and this is exactly why I don't just trust people just because they have letters after their names. It doesn't matter. The degree doesn't matter. The data does. The only thing that the degree tells you is that this person has been exposed to the data. It doesn't mean they know what the hell to do with it. This guy probably knows a lot about medicine, at least I'd hope so for the sake of his patients, but he clearly doesn't know a damn thing about general science, philosophy, logic, reason, or evidence, or anything like that. Because I get the impression he just doesn't care. It's why the second that someone pulls out the stupid "something can't come from nothing" crap, you know that you're talking to an idiot. It ought to be painfully simple for people to see right through that ridiculous screed, but the religious, the only people who ever bring that up, because certainly nobody in science ever does, they don't seem to be able to manage it. That's kind of sad, right? The greatest complexity known to us in the universe is the biological complexity of living creatures. Even those theologians who accept the scientific evidence for evolution as a complete explanation for biological complexity typically argue that God operates by means of evolution. However, a more than superficial understanding of evolution does lead many believers to the troubling and inescapable conclusion that a God who uses evolution to create living creatures can only be thoroughly cruel and indifferent, not to mention inefficient, tinkering, and bungling. On this point, the evolution rejecting literal creationists are probably correct. The teaching of evolution is deeply corrosive to religious faith. Except it's really not. The religious tend to be really impressed with life, but it really isn't that impressive. It's just their ego, not intellect. They want to feel special, and no matter how many times they insist that they are, they're just not. Because if you really pay attention to what he just said, it's all just an emotional diatribe. He doesn't want his imaginary friend to be that way. That doesn't mean anything because his imaginary friend, if it exists at all, which there's no evidence that it does, but if it did exist, it is the way that it is. His wishes and dreams don't matter. Things are the way that they are. How you wish they could be is entirely irrelevant. But when your entire worldview is just made up out of fifis and faith, what can you expect? Pretty much what you see from the religious, and that's pretty stupid. Nevertheless, believers in a higher power and higher plan who do accept evolution as entirely unguided can still fall back on the argument that the laws of physics are improbably fine-tuned to have allowed organized matter and life to have arisen in the first place. Towards the end of the 20th century, this argument seemed insurmountable. Believers could also point out that one of the most important laws of physics, the second law of thermodynamics, dictates that the universe proceeds toward increasing levels of disorder or entropy. So how could order arise unguided, spontaneously reversing this inexorable natural tendency towards disorder? Except absolutely none of that is at all true. This again is just, but I really want it to be true. But nobody cares what you want. The religious seem to have a really hard time separating their egos from their beliefs, and that, whether they like it or not, is a problem. But you can rest assured that if you look at it like this, you'll still be able to find emotional comfort. So what? This is why we keep asking, how do you know that, and how do you demonstrate it entirely separate from your faith? And they don't have any decent answers to that, do they? Your faith and your fifis don't matter. Why can't they get that through their heads? Well, the simple answer to that is that this isn't an intellectual exercise for the religious. It's pure emotion, and emotion doesn't mean anything. But it would be really nice if gravity would cease to exist. Said while falling out of an airplane, that is not going to make gravity suspend its existence just because you'd really like it to. You are not important. Reality does what it does, and you have to learn how to cope, whether you like it or not. Give it a shot. Adding to the impression of a spiritual realm and supernatural design, the mystery of consciousness is especially compelling. How could matter become conscious and self-aware? And how could this happen spontaneously and unguided? How can the experience of I be reducible to the laws of physics and to mere matter? How is it possible that our conscious selves could be formed as temporary phenomena and then just evaporate into utter non-existence when we die? See, this is where they always go wrong. I don't get it, therefore God is just stupid. I don't know where consciousness came from, therefore I'm going to staple my religious beliefs in there just because it makes me happy. No, that's stupid. It's the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard. If there is something that you don't know, then you don't know. You don't just get to throw an emotionally comforting explanation in there just because you really like the sound of it. It's why the religious are just so, and I hate to keep saying dumb, but I don't know that there's another more accurate word to describe it. If you've got a better idea, Let me know down in the comments. Moreover, what about values and ethics? How could such abstract and intangible qualities arise from the material stuff of the universe? Even if they somehow could, wouldn't morality be arbitrary or relative? How can meaning arise in a random material universe? How does purpose itself emerge in a purposeless universe? Well, what about ethics and values? Because we know how those work. Granted, the religious don't like the actual truth, which is why they just make things up that are more emotionally palatable to their minds. We call the things that we tend to like good and the things that we tend not to like bad. It's not universal. In fact, it's not even remotely close. The problem with a lot of theists is that they have no real experience outside of their religious echo chambers. They seriously think that everybody is just like they are. And they're wrong. But it is almost impossible to convince them of it because they just don't care. Morals and ethics don't need a god. They just need humans who are socially conscious and can empathize with others. Morals and ethics are actually pretty self-serving. Welcome to the real world. Turn the lights off when you're done with it. These are all intelligent and compelling arguments. They are a big part of the reason why, despite the decline of religion in Western societies over the past few centuries, a process that has accelerated in the last few decades and especially in recent years, many people still believe in some sort of higher power and higher plan. No, none of these are compelling arguments at all. They're all desperate attempts at being happy. Then he says, well, there's been a decline in religion in Western societies. But wasn't it just a couple of paragraphs ago where he said, theism even made a comeback in recent decades? No, it hasn't. The only place where theism of any kind is strong is in countries where education sucks. It's strong among ignorant people, and when ignorance starts to wane, so does religion. Yes, some people still believe, mostly because they were just indoctrinated into it at a young age, and they've never left the fold of the all-encompassing church, and they don't have enough of an education to actually know any better, but that is not something that you really ought to be proud of. Religion is dying. Let it die. We'll all be a hell of a lot better off when it's gone. A seismic shift in our understanding of the world. Nonetheless, in this century, there has been a dramatic shift towards definitive, convinced atheism among large numbers of former agnostics and believers, including a great many notable public intellectuals. And the majority of scientists, especially top-level scientists, are non-believers. Indeed, science today is practically synonymous with atheism. How come? Because reality does not support religion. I mean, that's the actual answer, whether the religious like it or not. We have become a more scientifically literate society, and as such, we are putting away childish things like religion. That's why there is a distinct and demonstrable negative correlation between advanced education and religiosity. The more educated you are, the less religious you tend to be. And I mean actual education, not those ridiculous religious diploma mills that they try to con people into going to for a buck. People who are graduating from legitimate accredited universities with degrees, especially in the sciences, those people are almost guaranteed to give up their religious beliefs. The more you know, the less you believe. Nice, isn't it? Despite many seemingly convincing arguments in favor of a supernaturally designed universe, a powerful scientific worldview has been constructed in modern times, with several key parts of the overall picture snapping into place in the last decade or two. No, that's just a bunch of conspiracy theory bullshit. In fact, a lot of people, at least in my opinion, since I can't actually tell what's going on in their heads, but I'm convinced that a lot of Christians, maybe even a majority of reported Christians, I don't think they really even believe this stuff. They just think that claiming so makes them look good to their neighbors. So much of religion is just social lubricant. If you act like you believe the same things, at least in public, at least that gives you something in common. If you have things in common, then maybe you'll actually help each other out, or at the very least, not hurt each other, which happens if you don't believe the same things and the religious come to call. They'll kick your ass if they can get away with it. Religion, by its very nature, it creates tribes that hate other tribes. It's a lot better, at least in some areas, to be part of the most powerful tribe, maybe most violent tribe, than to risk their wrath. We now have highly compelling and entirely plausible models for how our world, life, and consciousness could, in fact, have emerged entirely spontaneously and unguided, indeed, all the way from the universe's origins to its present complexity. Applying these models, no external or first cause is required, no intelligent designer, and no guiding hand. Science can also explain the fully natural emergence of purpose, meaning, and morality in a universe that began as simple, random, lifeless, purposeless, and indifferent. Wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be about profound questions to ask atheists. It's in the title. It really seems like he's just agreeing that science is compelling and entirely plausible and that gods are something best left in the past. Now, if he hadn't just spent a whole bunch of time making bad arguments for God, and they were bad arguments indeed, then I would have figured that he was actually an atheist and was just trying to point out to the religious just how unsupported their silly beliefs actually are. Then you wouldn't be seeing this video because I wouldn't have made it. However, because he did try to defend a belief in gods, badly, before he went off the rails into actual reality, that now I'm really not sure what to think. This kind of thing is very common though. You will find people who will get degrees in the sciences, who are very well studied, who do know how the world actually works, but who still really want to believe in a god. They spend a lot of time trying to rationalize why, with all the evidence and understanding that we have, why they still take this God stuff seriously. It's like they're just afraid to give it up. And that's kind of sad, right? So we're going to jump down a little bit because he spends some time self-aggrandizing and I find that completely unnecessary. If you want to go read it for yourself, the link as always is down in the description. Nobody is suggesting that science has complete explanations for everything. Some of the explanations have well-established evidence. Others are at the stage of plausible hypotheses that will continuously be improved. But science provides far better explanations and models for the appearance of design in the universe than does the invocation of supernaturalism. Better in the sense that the scientific explanations fit the data much more tightly without the contradictions and arbitrary adjustments that are required to make religious supernatural models. Importantly, the supernatural-free scientific models also make much more accurate, verifiable predictions. Is he on our side or what? Nobody is suggesting that science is perfect because if we had complete explanations for everything, we wouldn't really need science anymore, would we? We just have enough solid explanations that the idea of a God just doesn't make sense anymore, at least to people with half a brain. The people who still believe are the people who just really want it to be true. They can't apply actual knowledge, actual rational thought patterns to their beliefs because actual knowledge shows otherwise. They just want to believe. Sometimes they are just on the edge of credulity where their emotions interfere with their intellect, and that sounds like our good doctor here. Just take that last step into the real world where we actually are. It doesn't hurt, I promise. Today's scientific worldview is the result of pivotal breakthroughs in disparate fields. Considered separately and individually, these insights are radically paradigm-shifting in each of their fields. Taken together, they may actually be leading to a tipping point in the intellectual history of mankind. Not really. I mean, when you hold a failing view, then I guess you might see it that way, but human history has been a long list of slow, constant developments, sometimes with sea changes that advance quickly. But we've been heading this way for literally centuries. Every discovery that we make, it makes it less and less likely that any gods exist in the real world. This isn't new. I think that a lot of theists have just peeked out of their echo chambers and realized, holy crap, the jig is up. Then they take advantage of all the advances that science has made all this time to run around and go, the God is real. No, you've got nothing and nobody is at all impressed. You've lost. Give it up. In considering your own worldview, formulate the most profoundly challenging questions that can be posed to an atheist. Then seek the most informed answers. The answers might surprise you and set you on a fascinating path of discovery. We're well into the 21st century now. Don't get left behind. Yeah, don't worry. Most people are leaving religion behind. So why are they asking questions to atheists? I mean, that doesn't really make sense in light of the last couple of paragraphs, does it? And let's be honest, he didn't come up with any actual questions to ask atheists in his Profound Questions to Ask Atheists video. How dumb is this? Yet if they weren't trying to tell the religious to buck up and go do something, then why bring up all the incredibly terrible arguments for God? I just don't get it. Yep, I've run into a fair number of sort of educated theists who do essentially this. Heck, last I saw anything from Francis Collins, that was essentially what he was doing. He knows the science. He just really wants to believe. He just makes up an entirely different reality for his imaginary friend to inhabit, so he doesn't have to feel bad when he realizes that the real world doesn't support the things in his head. Well, how do you actually know that there is this different or larger world that you believe in? You're a scientist. You ought to know that you can't just posit one magical happy land without support. But apparently he just doesn't care. There's a double standard here between reality and religion. It's just that reality doesn't actually work that way. There are no double standards, and the religious require them. Therefore, in their heads, fifis win over facts. Because they just don't give a crap. Point it out to them and watch them get indignant. Well, we can do what we want. Sure, and we can just laugh at your bald rationalizations and stupidity. Very rapidly, there are becoming an awful lot more of us than there are of you. When the scale tips, most people will be laughing at you. A lot of them are doing it already. I'm waiting for the day when we outnumber them, because won't that be a wonderful day?